You still wearing that ragged thing, Dad? Ethan laughed, swirling his wine. Rachel chuckled too, her diamond earring swinging as she looked me up and down. My grandson kept his eyes on his plate. That jacket, old leather, faded at the seams, was Marjorie's last gift to me. She wrapped it in blue ribbon 2 weeks before she died. I wore it every year on our anniversary. Tonight was that night. I looked around my own dinner table and saw nothing but strangers in expensive clothes. I smiled, stood up slowly, and slipped the property papers into my pocket. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. There was a time when this house was filled with warmth, not heat from the fireplace, but warmth from laughter, clinking dishes, and small, happy sounds echoing through every room. I built this house with my hands, each nail, each plank, every brick in the garden wall. Marjorie chose the wallpaper. Pale yellow with soft blue stripes. Said it reminded her of a Sunday morning. And when she smiled, it did feel like Sunday, gentle, easy, and sacred. We were married 41 years before she passed. Cancer took her slow. I still remember how soft her hand felt in mine near the end, like she'd already started letting go. But before that, before the beeping monitors and quiet hallways, we lived. We really lived. Ethan was our only son. Born 3 years after we married. Marjorie had 2 miscarriages before him, and when he finally arrived, I remember holding him in the hospital, tears rolling off my face like rain on a windshield. I was terrified. And then I looked over and saw her smiling from the bed, weak but proud. "You're a father now," she whispered. I swore that day I'd never let that boy down. I worked 2 jobs when Ethan was young, early mornings at the mill, nights at the garage. I'd come home smelling like oil and sawdust, and Ethan would run to the door with his toy wrench, pretending to help me fix the front gate. He always wanted to be like Dad. Marjorie used to leave me little notes in my lunchbox, drawings from Ethan, or sometimes just a few words, "Keep going. We love you." Those years went fast, so fast I can barely remember the transitions. First steps turned into school runs. Bicycles into borrowed car keys. I missed some things, sure. Dance recitals? No. But maybe a few school plays. And yet I never missed what mattered: birthdays, hard talks, lessons in the garage. Ethan loved that garage. We rebuilt a beat-up Chevy truck together when he was 15. It wasn't perfect, but it ran. That was our project. Our bond. I tried to raise him the way my father raised me: honest work, firm hand, gentle voice when needed. Never lied to him, never raised my voice more than necessary. I wasn't always perfect, but I was present. And in a world full of absent fathers, I thought that counted for something. Marjorie made that house a home. She taught Ethan how to cook his first meal, scrambled eggs and toast, when he was 9. Said a man should know how to feed himself, not just wait to be fed. He burned the toast and dropped 1 egg on the floor. We laughed until we cried. I remember Sunday mornings, the 3 of us in the kitchen. Marjorie humming some old tune, Ethan on a stool helping flip pancakes, and me reading the paper but not really reading, just enjoying the peace. Sometimes I wish I could bottle those moments, keep them in a drawer, open them up when the nights get too quiet. The jacket, yes, that jacket. That was from our last anniversary before she passed. She'd been saving up quietly, using little bits from her sewing commissions. I didn't need it, my old coat was still hanging on, but she said, "It's not about needing, it's about deserving." She handed me the box and said, "It's just a hug, in leather." And every time I wear it, I can almost feel her arms around me. After she passed, Ethan was quiet for a long time. He was 28 then, already dating Rachel. He said he missed his mom. He came over a lot that year, helping me sort the garage, going through photo albums. I thought grief had brought us closer. Maybe it did for a while. We started having dinners every Friday. Just the two of us. I'd cook, we'd talk, sometimes sit in silence. Comfortable silence. But things began to shift slowly. At first, it was subtle. He started coming late. Then he'd bring Rachel, which I didn't mind. She was polite, smiled a lot, though her eyes never quite matched the smile. Then the dinners stopped altogether. He said work got busy. He said they were saving for a house. Eventually, he asked if they could stay in my guest room for a few months to save money. I said yes without thinking. Of course I did. He was my son. Those few months became a year. Then 2. And slowly, the house I built with Marjorie, the home filled with yellow walls and Sunday songs, began to change. Photos disappeared. My tools were packed away. My old recliner was too bulky and ended up in the garage. I didn't argue. I wanted to be easy. I wanted to support his new life. At some point, it stopped being my home. But I didn't speak up. Not then. Because I believed, maybe foolishly, that love and loyalty were enough. That what we had was stronger than a few modern chairs and silent dinners. That the boy who once ran to me with a toy wrench still lived somewhere inside the man with the sharp tie and tight schedule. I held on to that hope the way I held on to that jacket. And maybe that was my mistake. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was a Tuesday evening. I'd just come back from my usual walk around the neighborhood, wearing that same old jacket. A few neighbors nodded as I passed, some smiled. I liked those walks. They cleared the fog in my head, gave me space to talk to Marjorie in my thoughts. When I came back that evening, Rachel was standing in the kitchen, holding my jacket between 2 fingers like it was soaked in something foul. "This thing was on the back of the dining chair," she said. "It's really worn out, don't you think?" She didn't say it with venom. That was the thing about Rachel. She had this way of dressing insults in soft tones, like wrapping a blade in silk. I chuckled lightly, trying not to make it a thing. "It's older than Ethan, that's true. But it's comfortable." She shrugged. "Just saying, maybe it's time to let go of some old things." I hung it back on the hook by the front door and didn't say a word. But something in me tightened. A little coil, barely noticeable, began to wind. It was never one big moment, that came later. It was small, steady shifts. Little ways the balance of respect tilted, quietly but constantly. One night, I heard Ethan on the phone in the living room. I was in the hallway, on my way to the kitchen, when I stopped. "No, he's fine," Ethan said. "Just stuck in his ways. Yeah, he still pays with checks. Doesn't even have a smartphone. It's like living with a museum exhibit." There was laughter on the other end. I didn't move. He didn't mean harm. I kept telling myself that. But it stung in a way I didn't want to admit. Like being slowly painted out of a picture you spent your life framing. Another time, I walked in while they were discussing the guest room, my room, before they moved in. Rachel was sitting at her laptop. "If we knock down that wall, we could do a proper en-suite. Maybe even rent it out." Ethan nodded, like it was already theirs. "We'd have to talk to Dad, but yeah. Talk to me. Not ask. Not include. Just inform." That's when I realized something. I had slowly become an accessory in my own home. Like the antique radio no one uses but doesn't want to throw out because it adds character. They began making decisions without me, redecorating rooms, moving furniture, changing the layout of the garage. The garage. That used to be our space. One day I went out to grab a box of Marjorie's keepsakes, letters, some recipes she'd written in that soft, curved script of hers, and found the shelf empty. The whole cabinet was gone. replaced with some metal storage units and gardening tools I didn't recognize. When I asked Ethan about it, he waved it off. We needed space for Rachel's planters. The stuff in there was just old papers, right? Just old papers. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked to my room and sat on the bed for a long time. That was the night I started locking the drawer where I kept the property papers. Something in me no longer felt safe. Finances were the next shift. Rachel started offering to help manage things. Said she could set up autopay for my bills, streamline my expenses. It sounded thoughtful, modern, efficient. But it came with conditions. They wanted access to my bank account. Just to help, Dad, Ethan said. Make things easier. I didn't like the idea. I wasn't helpless. I paid my bills on time, kept track of every dollar. Marjorie had taught me to budget down to the cent when we were scraping by in the early years. I appreciate it, I said, but I've got it covered. Rachel's face tightened. It's not that we don't trust you. We just want to help you, simplify. That word again. Simplify. As if my life had become clutter. As if I had. After that conversation, Ethan barely spoke to me for a week. Cold shoulders, short replies. I asked him about work, nothing. Asked about my grandson, a shrug. It was like I'd stepped into the background, and he was content to leave me there. I overheard Rachel one morning on a video call. She didn't see me standing near the stairs. We're trying to be patient, she said to someone on the screen. But the house is just sitting there. Once it's officially ours, we can finally start fresh. Start fresh. They were already talking like I was gone. That's when the unease turned into something else, clarity. I had spent decades putting their comfort before my own. And now, I was being slowly edged out, politely, quietly, but deliberately. I started paying closer attention. Not just to what they said, but to what they didn't. The silences. The dismissive glances. The decisions made without me. The way Rachel never said, "You're home," but, "the house." Even my grandson, Noah, seemed distant. Sweet kid, but Rachel always answered for him when I asked if he wanted to go fishing or help in the garage. He's got homework, she'd say. Or, he's not into that stuff. I started wondering if he even had the choice. One night, I stood in the kitchen alone, staring at the cabinets Marjorie picked out 30 years ago. I ran my hand over the surface, felt the faint grooves where her wedding ring had chipped the finish over time. I whispered, "It's still our home, right?" But no one answered. It happened at a Sunday lunch. Rachel had organized it, her parents were visiting, and she wanted to make a good impression. I didn't argue. I kept to myself mostly, washed my own dishes, stayed out of their way. I wasn't trying to stir any trouble. I just wanted to live out my days quietly in the house Marjorie and I built, with the memories that kept me warm on cold mornings. I even wore a collared shirt that day. Not the jacket, I didn't want to provoke Rachel, but something neat. I brought out a tray of lemonade, placed it gently on the table, and took my seat at the far end, near the window that faced Marjorie's garden. Rachel's father was a tall, loud man named Walter, the kind who wore cologne that arrived 10 seconds before he did. Her mother, a bit quieter, clutched a wine glass like it was an oxygen mask. The conversation started off light, real estate prices, some cruise they were planning, a new car Walter had bought. Then Rachel said, "We've been talking about remodeling the house once the paperwork is finalized." She said it like I wasn't there. Like I wasn't sitting 6 feet away, folding a napkin slowly between my hands. Walter perked up. "Oh? You're moving?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Not exactly. Dad's still here. But we've started the process of updating ownership. It's just a matter of time." No one looked at me. I felt my ears burn. Not from anger, not yet, but something colder. The feeling you get when you realize the rules have changed and no one bothered to tell you. Rachel smiled. We're thinking of opening up the kitchen. Maybe taking down that wall to create more space. And if we do the upstairs right, Noah can finally have a bigger room. Just need to convince Dad it's time to let go of the old layout, Ethan added, glancing at me for the briefest moment, not with affection, but with that patient smile you give a stubborn customer. I set the napkin down. What paperwork are we finalizing? I asked, voice steady, though my heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. Silence. Just a beat. Rachel looked to Ethan. Ethan shifted in his seat. Oh, well, he began, I mean the inheritance stuff. We just thought, with how things are going, it's easier to start making those changes now. For everyone's benefit. Rachel chimed in. It's not about control, Mr. Harris. It's about efficiency. You've had your time with the house. Now it's about setting up the future. You've had your time. I stood up then, not abruptly, just enough to make the chair legs scrape softly against the floor. Everyone stopped talking. Even Walter shut his mouth. I see, I said. Ethan laughed nervously. Dad, don't take it the wrong way. We're just being practical. You've always said you wanted things to be smooth when the time came. The time for what? I asked, eyes locked on his. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I looked around the table. This was supposed to be my family. My home. And yet I felt like a guest at my own funeral, everyone discussing the future as if I was already gone, nothing more than a legal obstacle. No one said anything after that. I excused myself and walked out to the porch. Sat in Marjorie's rocking chair. The wood creaked beneath me, familiar and worn. I watched a few bees dance around the lavender she planted years ago. My hands trembled slightly, but not from rage. It was heartbreak, the deep, silent kind that settles in your chest and doesn't move. I stayed out there until they were gone. Not one of them came to check on me. Later that night, Ethan knocked on my door. Dad, he said, can we talk? I didn't open it. I just said, about what? The wall you're knocking down? Or the man still living behind it? Silence. Then his footsteps retreated. I waited until I heard their bedroom door close. Then I walked to the kitchen, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the old manila envelope, the one holding the original deed to the house, signed by Marjorie and me in ink that had started to fade. I ran my thumb across the edge of the paper. This house had stories in its walls. Scratches on the doorframe from Ethan's growth chart. Faint marks on the kitchen counter from Marjorie's baking trays. A squeaky stair she refused to fix because she said it sounded like the house was laughing. And now they wanted to tear it all down. For space. For efficiency. The betrayal wasn't in their planning. It was in their silence. In their assumption that I didn't matter anymore, that I wouldn't fight. That I wouldn't notice. But I had noticed. And I wasn't done yet. A few days after that lunch, something changed in me. It was subtle at first, like the quiet shift in wind before a storm. I started paying more attention. To the way Rachel locked the office door when she wasn't home. To how Ethan flinched when I walked into a room unexpectedly. To how they whispered at night, even when the house was still and the walls should have made them feel alone. I never liked snooping. Marjorie and I built our marriage on trust, and I carried that principle even after she passed. But trust requires truth. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being kept from me. One Thursday afternoon, when Ethan and Rachel were out taking Noah to his tennis practice, I stood outside their home office door. It was cracked open just enough. Inside, Rachel's laptop screen still glowed. I know I shouldn't have stepped in. But something compelled me, a knot in my gut that wouldn't loosen. I walked in and saw a folder on the desktop titled, Property Transfer, Draft 3. My hands hovered above the mouse. I opened it. PDFs, emails, scans of legal forms. All of them centered around a transfer of property ownership, from me to Ethan and Rachel. Most concerning were the notes: power of attorney application, elder care housing options, suggested timeline for relocation, spring. They weren't just planning a remodel. They were planning a life without me in it. There was even a bullet-pointed checklist. Confirm medical records. Begin estate restructuring. Notify Dad in phases. Secure signatures quietly. Begin renovations by May. I stepped back from the desk like it had burned me. I stood there in silence, heart pounding in my chest like war drums. I'd lived in that house for over 40 years. I built every corner with my own hands. That fireplace? I laid the brick myself. The floorboards in the hallway? I sanded and stained them over 2 sweltering summers. And now they were carving me out of it, one paper at a time. That night, I barely slept. I laid awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint tick of the clock, the one Marjorie had insisted on keeping even when it stopped working right. "It's not about time," she once said. "It's about presence." She would have known what to say. She always did. I imagined her sitting beside me, her voice soft but sure. "You can't make someone love your memories just because you do. But you can protect them." The next morning, I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside was a bundle of her letters, wrapped in blue ribbon. I hadn't touched them in years. My hands trembled as I opened one, her handwriting still neat, each curve gentle and familiar. "If Ethan ever forgets what this home meant to us, remind him. Not with anger, but with truth. This house holds us both, even when I'm gone." I spent the rest of the morning moving slowly through each room. The way you do when you're saying goodbye, except this wasn't farewell, not yet. I looked at every photograph still on the wall, every corner that had a memory. Then I went into the attic. That's where I kept the originals, documents, receipts, the signed will Marjorie and I had drafted together in 2004. It was simple, everything went to Ethan. We never thought twice about it. Back then, love was enough of a reason. But now? Now love felt like it had been replaced by leverage. Later that week, I overheard Rachel on the phone again. She was in the backyard, speaking to someone on speakerphone. I stood inside, just beyond the screen door. "Yes, he's still here. Yes, I know it's taking longer. He's stubborn. But once we get the new paperwork signed, it'll all move forward." "No, he hasn't seen the documents yet. Ethan's going to ease him into it. Ease me into it." Like I was some confused old man who wouldn't notice his life being peeled away in layers. I stepped back, closed the door quietly, and went to my room. That night, I made a copy of every document I had, the deed, the original will, even Marjorie's notes. I put them in a folder, labeled it simply, Truth. From that day on, I started watching more carefully. How Ethan always checked the mail before I could. How Rachel locked certain drawers in the kitchen that used to hold nothing but cutlery. How they spoke to Noah in hushed tones when I entered the room. He was a good kid. Still young enough to see through lies, but old enough to feel the tension. He'd started avoiding me lately, not out of cruelty, but confusion. I saw it in his eyes. The way he lingered near the hallway when I sat in the living room, the way he looked like he wanted to ask something but never quite did. It broke my heart. Because I knew what they were doing would eventually touch him, too. Not in ways he'd understand right now, but later, when trust becomes harder to build than to break. And so, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to confront them in some dramatic scene. That would only feed their narrative, that I was old, unstable, emotional. No. I would be quiet. Careful. Watchful. But most importantly, prepared. Because what they didn't know was that while they were drafting plans to move me out, I was already writing the first line of mine. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. The day I finally said something, it wasn't planned. I'd told myself I would wait, stay quiet, gather everything I needed, speak only when I could not be ignored. But sometimes pain has a way of finding its voice before you do. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I'd gone into the kitchen for a glass of water. Rachel was on the phone again, pacing by the dining room window. "Yes, we'll have full access by the end of next month," she said, voice low and clipped. "He's agreed in spirit, just hasn't signed yet. Ethan's handling it. Don't worry." I froze. Agreed in spirit? I hadn't agreed to anything. Not in spirit, not in writing, not in the silence they kept mistaking for consent. When she hung up and turned around, she jumped slightly, surprised to see me standing there. "Dad," she started. I raised a hand. "Don't lie to me, Rachel." She blinked. I wasn't lying. You just told someone I'd agreed to transfer this house. You told them Ethan is handling it. Do you know what this place means? What it holds? She opened her mouth again, but I kept going. You walk around like I'm already dead. You call it efficiency. I call it erasure. Her expression shifted then, less surprised, more irritated. Like my grief had become an inconvenience. "Look, we're trying to make this transition easier for everyone. You said yourself you don't want to deal with paperwork or stress. We're stepping up." "You're stepping in," I said. "Not up." She didn't respond. Just turned and walked away. That night, I waited for Ethan to come home from work. He walked into the living room still holding his briefcase when I said, "We need to talk." He looked tired. But that didn't stop the flicker of defensiveness that lit up in his eyes. "I saw the documents," I said. "I saw the plans. The transfer files. The will revisions you're drafting without me. What exactly were you planning to tell me? After you signed everything on my behalf?" He set his briefcase down slowly. "Dad, it's not like that." "Then tell me what it's like, son. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and your wife are treating me like a barrier. Like something to work around." He sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "I was going to talk to you. I swear. I didn't know how." That hurt more than anything. Because this was the boy who used to come to me with scraped knees, failed tests, heartbreak. And now he didn't know how to talk to me? "You could have just asked," I said quietly. "You could have sat with me, like we used to. Told me what you wanted. I might have said yes. But you didn't trust me with the truth." He sat down, rested his elbows on his knees. "Rachel thinks it's time. She says you're getting older. That you shouldn't be dealing with legal stuff or maintenance. And what do you think?" He looked up at me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw it, that hesitation. That flicker of guilt. "I think I let it go too far," he said. "I think I wanted things to be easier, and I convinced myself that you'd understand." "I do understand," I said. "I understand that you saw my quiet as permission. That you mistook my patience for surrender." He didn't argue. "I'm not going anywhere, Ethan," I continued. "And this house isn't yours yet. You might get it someday, maybe. But not like this." That was the end of it. He didn't speak. I didn't push. But the next morning, I noticed something odd. Rachel was colder than usual. Not angry, just vacant. She didn't make eye contact. Didn't offer her usual curt, "Good morning." It was like I'd been erased from the air entirely. Ethan left for work without saying a word. I took my walk as usual, but this time, my neighbor George waved me over from his porch. "Everything all right, Henry?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly. I forced a smile. "Course." "Why?" He shrugged. "Heard Rachel yelling on the phone last night. Something about signatures and you being stubborn. You know I don't like gossip, but just wanted to check in." George was the kind of man who spoke plainly and without drama. If he said something, it wasn't idle talk. That evening, I sat on the back porch alone, watching the light fade over Marjorie's garden. I thought about how she used to hum while trimming the rose bushes. How she used to say, "You can't force something to bloom faster, you'll only break it." And yet here I was, surrounded by people pulling at petals, trying to make things bloom on their schedule. I realized then I couldn't wait anymore. I had to protect what was mine, not just the house, but the story it carried. I couldn't let it be sold off, gutted, flipped for profit like it was just another listing. So the next day, I made a phone call. Alan, an old friend and now retired lawyer, picked up after 2 rings. "Henry," he said, surprised. "Yeah," I replied. "I need to talk about my will." Alan's office hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. Same dusty green lamp on the corner of his desk. Same crooked picture frame with a photo of his wife and their dog from 10 years ago. And Alan himself, same glasses, same wry smile, just a little more gray around the temples. We'd known each other since we were 21. Went fishing together. Watched each other become husbands, then fathers. Then widowers. He didn't say much at first. Just gestured for me to sit. "You look like hell," he said gently. "Feel worse," I admitted. He opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "You brought the deed?" I slid the papers across his desk. "Deed. Original will. A copy of Marjorie's handwritten letter." My hands didn't shake, not this time. "I need to update everything," I said. "Immediately." Alan skimmed the documents with a speed only years of practice could provide. "You want to revoke the current will?" "Yes," I said. "Ethan's no longer the beneficiary. Not under current circumstances." Alan looked up, eyes narrowing with concern. "You sure?" "More than I've ever been." He nodded slowly, then reached into a second drawer and pulled out a fresh set of forms. "Okay then. Tell me what you want to do." I told him everything. That the house stays in my name until I pass, no early transfer. That the full estate, including the property, savings, and investments, would go to a trust I'd set up for a local veteran support organization, the same one Marjorie volunteered at in her later years. Marjorie always said they were her second family, I added. They treated her with more care in a week than some people have shown me in years. Alan scribbled a few notes, then paused. "Do you want to include a clause about contesting the will?" I nodded. "If Ethan or Rachel try to fight it, the trust gets everything. No appeals. No second chances." "That'll hold in court," he said. Strongly. It was a strange feeling, sitting there across from an old friend, drafting what amounted to the final statement of your life. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was simply drawing a line, one I should have drawn long ago. Alan must have sensed my thoughts because he put the pen down and looked me square in the eye. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "But if you need to say it out loud, I'm listening." I took a breath. I spent 40 years building a life with Marjorie. And in the last few months, I've watched that life be quietly dismantled under my roof. I raised Ethan with everything I had. Worked myself into bone and blood for that boy. But somewhere along the line, he started thinking love came with entitlement. I looked down at the papers. This house was never meant to be currency. It was supposed to be memory. Safety. Home. Alan didn't speak. Just handed me the pen. I signed. Every page. Every line. Steady, clear, final. When it was done, he placed the papers in a secure envelope and handed me a copy for my records. "You did the right thing," he said. "I hope so," I replied. He walked me out. Before I left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "If anything goes sideways, you call me. You're not alone in this, Henry." I nodded, then walked out into the crisp afternoon sun. The wind carried the scent of distant rain. I took the long way home. When I walked through the front door, Ethan was on the couch, flipping through channels. Rachel was in the kitchen, talking to Noah about homework. I didn't say anything to them. Just went to my room, opened the drawer, and replaced the old will with the new one. I held on to that envelope for a moment longer than necessary. Not out of regret, but because I could feel Marjorie in the room with me. As if her hand were resting lightly on my shoulder. "You did good," I imagined her saying. "Not because it hurts, but because it protects." That night, I sat in the garage for hours. I dusted off the old photo of Ethan and me rebuilding the Chevy. Cleaned a few old tools. Ran my hands over the handle of the workbench Marjorie had stained herself. I felt something ease inside me, not joy, not yet. But a steadiness. A kind of control I hadn't felt in months. And with it came a quiet resolve. They thought they were making plans behind my back. But now, I had a plan of my own. And mine had the law on its side. The final straw came wrapped in linen napkins and passive-aggressive smiles. Rachel decided to host a dinner. "For closure," she said. She framed it like a gesture of peace, a way for the three of us to talk things through. I knew better. It was a performance, one last act to convince me to hand over the house quietly, with dignity, as if that mattered more than honesty. I could have declined. But something in me said to go. Not to argue, not to plead. Just to see. To hear it from them. And to remember. I wore Marjorie's jacket. Not to provoke, but because I needed her near. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. The cuffs were fraying, the lining a bit torn, but it held me like armor. I walked into the dining room and saw the table set like it was someone's birthday, silverware polished, glasses sparkling, candles flickering with false warmth. Rachel smiled too brightly. Ethan looked stiff. Noah wasn't there. "I thought it'd just be adults tonight," Rachel explained casually, pouring wine into my glass before I could object. Less confusion. I nodded and sat down. For a while, it was all small talk. The weather. Work. Rachel's mother's recent surgery. I barely listened. I watched their body language, how Ethan wouldn't meet my eye, how Rachel kept looking at her watch. And then it came. "So," Rachel said, her voice smooth, like a presentation. "We wanted to talk to you, gently, respectfully, about next steps." Ethan cleared his throat. "We know this house means a lot to you, Dad. But we also think it's time we started building our own chapter here." Rachel jumped in. "We've already spoken to an architect. Nothing drastic, just opening up the kitchen, adding a sunroom, updating the upstairs bath. All things that increase value, of course." I said nothing. Ethan tried to smile. "We want you to be part of it, truly. But we also want you to be comfortable. We've looked into some great senior communities. Not a nursing home, just a place where you don't have to worry about maintenance or noise. A place," Rachel added, "where you can finally rest." Finally rest. As if I'd spent my whole life preparing to be tucked away somewhere quiet. I looked down at my plate. Steak, mashed potatoes, green beans. The food I used to cook for Ethan as a kid. But none of it tasted like memory tonight. You've already made your decision, I said softly. Haven't you? Rachel gave a polite smile. We thought it best to handle the heavy lifting. You've earned a break. I set my fork down slowly. And if I say no? Ethan stiffened. Then we'll figure it out. But, it doesn't have to be complicated, Dad. I reached into my coat pocket and ran my fingers over the edge of the folder inside. I'd brought it with me, just in case. I see, I said, pushing my chair back gently. Well then, I won't keep you from your plans. Rachel's smile faltered. You're leaving. I am. But we haven't. I stood, straightened the jacket, and looked at both of them. This home isn't a project. It's not a blueprint or a profit margin. It's a life. And you've spent the last year trying to erase it. Ethan stood too, trying to calm the room. Dad, wait. I already have, I said. Long enough. I turned and walked to my room. My hand was steady as I opened the drawer, pulled out the file marked Truth, and placed it into a small leather briefcase. I packed my documents, a few clothes, and Marjorie's letters. By the time I reached the front door, Rachel had followed me down the hall. Where are you going? I looked back at her, not with anger, not even with grief. Just clarity. Somewhere I can rest, I said. Without being buried alive. She didn't respond. As I stepped outside, the evening air wrapped around me like a silent witness. I walked to my truck, the same old Chevy Ethan and I had rebuilt decades ago. It started on the first try. I didn't look back. Not yet. I drove to the local motel. Simple. Clean. Paid in cash. Spent the night reading one of Marjorie's letters, her words soft in the lamplight beside the bed. I'll keep you company when you're lonely, she'd written once. Even if it's just my memory beside you. The next morning, I called Alan. I'm ready, I said. It's time. He met me at his office, and together we reviewed everything. The new will. The clauses. The ownership papers. And the one document I hadn't shown anyone, the audio recordings. I'd begun documenting conversations, discreetly. Not because I wanted a courtroom fight, but because I wanted truth on my side if it came to that. Alan listened, nodded, and made copies. Do you want to deliver it in person? He asked. I thought for a moment. Yes, I said. But not yet. There's one more thing I need to do. Because this wasn't just about confronting them. It was about reclaiming something. Not the house, not just the house. But my place in it. The invitation came in a white envelope with gold trim. Rachel's handwriting, elegant and precise. You are cordially invited to Noah's school fundraiser dinner, Saturday at 6 p.m. Formal attire. They sent it to the motel. That told me two things. One, they knew exactly where I was staying, and two, they wanted to make a show. Not just for me, for everyone. I stared at the invitation for a long time. The boy I used to teach how to fish was playing piano that night, Rachel had added. It would mean a lot if you came. The irony didn't escape me. They'd tried to edge me out of their lives quietly, now they wanted my presence when it served their image. I thought about tossing the invite. But something told me this was the moment. Not to yell. Not to humiliate. Just to reveal the truth, calmly, publicly, and with dignity. Saturday came. I put on my oldest gray suit, the one Marjorie once called charming in a modest way. I wore the jacket again too, not out of defiance, but out of memory. Her presence steadied me. When I arrived, the venue buzzed with soft music and laughter. Circular tables draped in white cloth, centerpieces with little flickering candles. Parents, teachers, donors. People who saw Ethan and Rachel as the ideal young couple, successful, ambitious, devoted to family. I walked in, briefcase in hand. Ethan spotted me first. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Rachel's expression tightened, just for a second, before smoothing over into pleasant surprise. "Dad," Ethan said, walking over. "You made it." I nodded. "Of course. I wouldn't miss Noah's recital." Rachel touched my arm lightly. "We're really glad you came. It means a lot to him." "I hope it will," I said. We made small talk for a few minutes. But I could feel Rachel's eyes flitting toward my briefcase, again and again. She knew. When the piano performances ended, the head of the school stepped up to the mic to thank everyone for coming. I waited until the applause faded. Then I stood. "Excuse me," I said, voice calm but clear. "May I say a few words?" The room quieted quickly. A few heads turned. Ethan shifted in his seat. Rachel froze. "I won't take much of your time," I continued. "I'm just a father. A grandfather. A man who's lived in the same house for over 40 years. A house I built with my wife, brick by brick. Room by room. A home filled with memory." I paused. "A few months ago, I discovered that my son and his wife had begun planning renovations. Legal transfers. Even relocation plans, for me. None of it discussed. None of it asked. Just, assumed." A quiet murmur spread across the tables. Rachel stood suddenly. "Dad, maybe we should." I raised a hand. "Please. Let me finish." I opened the briefcase and pulled out the folder. Held it gently in both hands. "This is the original deed to my house. Still in my name. This," I lifted the next paper, "is the updated will, legally filed, witnessed, and signed. It revokes all previous inheritance arrangements." Gasps. Someone dropped a fork. "And this," I said, pulling out a small audio recorder, "is a collection of conversations, between my son, his wife, and others, discussing their plans for my estate while I was still very much alive." Rachel's face turned white. Ethan stood up. "Dad, come on, this isn't the place." "It's the perfect place," I replied, voice firm. "Because for once, I'm not hiding. I'm not being quiet. I'm not pretending I didn't hear the whispers, the plans, the phone calls. I've spent my entire life putting others first. I won't spend what's left being erased by convenience." I turned to the crowd. "Let this be a reminder, silence is not the same as consent. And love without respect is just control in costume." No one clapped. No one spoke. I turned, walked back to my seat, and sat down. Rachel looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Ethan stared at his hands. The entire room felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't stay for dessert. As I left the building, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Noah. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "can I come see you sometime?" I nodded, throat tight. "Anytime." He gave me a hug. A real one. That was all I needed. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The motel room felt quieter than usual that night. No traffic noise. No guests chatting through thin walls. Just stillness, the kind that settles over you after something final, something irreversible. I sat on the edge of the bed, Marjorie's letter unfolded beside me, the jacket draped over the chair. My hands rested on my knees, steady now, though I could still feel the adrenaline humming in my chest from the confrontation. I'd done it. Not for revenge. Not to hurt Ethan or shame Rachel. But because I needed to be seen. Heard. Respected, not as an old man clutching onto the past, but as the foundation they all stood on. And foundations crack when you chip at them long enough. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through the night. The next morning, I went to the diner on Main Street, the one Marjorie and I used to go to every Sunday after church. Patty, the waitress with too much blush and not enough patience for small talk, raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "Heard there was a bit of a scene at the fundraiser," she said, pouring me a coffee without asking. I smiled. "I suppose you could call it that." She didn't pry further. Just slid a plate of eggs and toast toward me and went back to work. The whispers started soon after. Small-town silence isn't real, it's just the pause before everyone starts buzzing. Some people stopped me in the street, offering quiet nods of support. A few offered more than that. George, my neighbor, stopped by the motel one evening with a bag of groceries. "You stood your ground," he said. "Good." "Didn't feel good," I replied. "Maybe not," he said, handing me a can of soup. "But it was necessary." Others kept their distance. Rachel's parents, for example, who once sent Christmas cards like clockwork, now avoided eye contact when we passed at the pharmacy. I didn't mind. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. And free. That was the strangest part, the freedom. No more pretending. No more walking on eggshells in my own home. No more being treated like a burden too stubborn to realize the world had moved on without him. For a while, I spent my days walking around town. Sitting at the park. Reading the paper with my coffee. Sometimes, I'd stop by Marjorie's grave. Tell her about what happened. Not everything, just the quiet bits. "I did what you'd have done," I said once, tracing her name on the headstone. Maybe a little messier. The grief softened in those moments. Less sharp, more like a dull ache you learn to carry. About a week after the fundraiser, Noah showed up at the motel. Knocked twice, then waited. When I opened the door, he just stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding a Tupperware container. "Mom said I shouldn't come," he said. "But I wanted to." I stepped aside and let him in. He placed the container on the table. "It's my lasagna. I made it for school last week. Thought you might like some." I sat across from him. "Smells better than anything your dad ever cooked." That made him smile. We ate in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "I will be." "I didn't know what they were planning," he said. "I swear. They just kept saying it was grown-up stuff." I looked at him, really looked. 14 years old. Growing into a man too fast, probably confused, maybe even ashamed. And yet he came. That meant something. "You're not responsible for what they did," I said. "But you get to decide who you become, Noah. That's what matters." He looked down at his plate. "I don't want to be like them." "Then don't be." We didn't talk much after that. But when he left, he hugged me again, tighter this time. That hug stayed with me all night. Later that week, I got a call from Alan. "Thought you might want to know," he said. "They came by the office." "Ethan and Rachel?" "Yep." Didn't say much. Just wanted to confirm it was real. That the documents were official. That you'd meant it. And? They left quiet. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need it. Instead, I took a walk out past the edge of town, down to the community lot where the old veteran center used to be. It had been shut down years ago due to lack of funding. Just a boarded-up building now, weeds growing through the sidewalk cracks. But I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I thought of Marjorie. Her work with the veterans, organizing clothing drives, helping with transportation, cooking meals every Friday night. "This place could have done some good," she once told me, frowning at the news article about the closure. If people remembered what matters. And as I stood there, something settled into place inside me. The house wasn't just going to sit there now. It wasn't going to rot in paperwork or gather dust in legal files. It was going to live again. The next morning, I sat at the motel desk with a notepad and a cup of black coffee, staring at a blank page. And then, slowly, I started writing. It began with a name, Marjorie's Hearth. That's what I would call it. Not a shelter. Not a boarding house. A hearth, because that's what Marjorie had always created wherever she went. A place of warmth. Safety. Home. Not a building, but a feeling. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It couldn't be. And I no longer wanted it to sit there under Rachel and Ethan's unspoken resentment, or Noah's confusion. It deserved laughter in the halls again. Movement. Purpose. I made a list. Restore the garden. Open the upstairs rooms. Convert the garage into a community space. Invite veterans and neighbors in need. Serve dinner on Fridays, like Marjorie did. It felt right. That afternoon, I called Alan again. "Are you planning to harass me into early retirement?" he joked when he answered. "Wouldn't dare," I replied. "I need advice." I explained the idea. Turning the house into a private foundation. Creating a living trust that would preserve its purpose long after I was gone. Alan listened without interrupting, which told me he thought it was worth hearing. "You've got the property, the means, and, frankly, the courage," he said when I finished. "We can make this happen." Within a few days, we had the paperwork started. Alan drafted a new trust document. I pulled some funds from my savings and sold a few small investments. Enough to cover initial repairs and permits. The next step was the hard part, returning to the house. I hadn't stepped foot on that porch since the night I walked away. But when I did, I didn't feel anger. I felt focus. Rachel was at the kitchen table when I walked in. She looked up from her laptop and went still. The air between us tightened. "I'm not here to argue," I said. She didn't speak. Just closed her laptop slowly. "I'm reclaiming the house. Not to spite you. Not to punish anyone. But because it still means something. And I won't let that be forgotten." Her eyes narrowed. "You're seriously turning it into a soup kitchen?" I didn't flinch. "I'm turning it into a place that feeds people. That heals people. Something you clearly can't understand." She scoffed. "What will people think?" "Hopefully," I said, setting the keys back into my pocket, "they'll think it's better than letting it rot in silence." She didn't stop me. She didn't even follow me when I walked through the house, room by room, taking notes on repairs. She stayed seated, like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome but still refused to leave. That evening, I called George, then a few other neighbors. By the end of the week, we had a small team, a retired carpenter, a high school shop teacher, 2 college students who needed summer volunteer hours. They came with paint brushes, drills, and energy. I came with coffee, sandwiches, and quiet direction. And for the first time in a long time, the house buzzed again. We tore down the moldy curtains. Pulled weeds from the front walk. Repainted the porch swing. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Claire, offered to repaint the living room. She asked me what color Marjorie liked best. "Yellow," I said. "Soft yellow. Like Sunday mornings." So she painted it just like that. One night, I found an old recipe book tucked in the back of the kitchen drawer, Marjorie's handwriting on every page. I ran my hand over the words, felt her in the loops of every M and G. That Friday, I made her lentil stew. Set a big pot in the middle of the new dining table, now surrounded by mismatched chairs donated from neighbors. 7 people showed up. By the following week, it was 14. Some were veterans. Some were single parents. A few were just lonely. But they came. They ate. They stayed to wash dishes and tell stories and laugh in that way that fills a house to the roof. On the third Friday, as I stirred the stew, someone knocked on the open front door. It was Mia, Ethan and Rachel's daughter. Noah's little sister. 11 years old, hair in 2 braids, holding a small stack of books. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, eyes wide. "Mom doesn't know I'm here." I knelt beside her. "You hungry?" She nodded. That night, she sat between 2 older women who taught her how to play dominoes after dinner. She laughed until her nose scrunched up the same way Marjorie's used to when she couldn't stop giggling. After everyone left, she hugged me and whispered, "I like it here." I smiled. Me too. By the time the 6th Friday dinner came around, we were running out of chairs. That was a good problem to have. We'd started with 7 people. By now, we had close to 30, veterans, neighbors, a few high schoolers, even a young couple who just moved to town and didn't know anyone yet. The house had changed, yes, but it hadn't lost its soul. It had found it again. Marjorie's hearth wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real. Living. Breathing. And it was home. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew with one hand, balancing a tray of cornbread with the other, while someone in the living room played an old acoustic guitar. Laughter echoed off the walls. Someone called out from the back door asking for more lemonade. A toddler was chasing a dog around the front yard. It was chaos. It was perfect. The garden was blooming again. George and I had pulled up the weeds and planted tomatoes, rosemary, marigolds, things Marjorie loved. There were solar lights along the path now, flickering like little sentinels guiding people to the front porch. The porch swing had a fresh coat of white paint. It squeaked when I sat on it, just like it used to. One evening, I was out there sipping coffee when Mia climbed up beside me. She didn't say much, just leaned her head on my arm and rocked gently with me as the sun dipped low behind the trees. "I like Fridays," she said. I smiled. Me too. Noah started coming more often as well. Quietly, at first. Sitting in the back, helping serve plates, washing dishes without being asked. I didn't press him. Didn't ask questions. Just let him be. One night, as we cleaned up, he asked, "Is it weird that this place feels more like home than our actual house?" I looked at him, really looked. The boy I raised had turned into a young man without me realizing it. "No," I said. "That's not weird at all." He nodded, then went back to wiping down the counter. Sometimes we'd go into the garage together, dust off the old tools, poke around the shelves. I told him stories, about the truck Ethan and I rebuilt, about the time Marjorie accidentally stained the floor with beet juice and laughed for 10 minutes straight. "Were you and Grandma always this happy?" he asked once. I thought about it. "No," I said. "But we were always trying to be. That's the difference." He liked that answer. The funny thing is, the people who started coming to the house, the ones we'd call strangers a few months ago, they began treating me like family, without question. They listened when I spoke. Brought extra groceries when they knew we were low. One of the veterans, Mark, started calling me Pops. Said I reminded him of his dad, except calmer. "You got that quiet strength, Henry," he said. "Not the kind that pushes. The kind that holds people up." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just said, "Thank you." Every room in the house was in use now. The guest room Ethan once claimed was turned into a reading space, full of donated books, warm lamps, beanbags for the kids. Upstairs, 2 rooms were converted for short-term stays, for folks who needed a bed for a night or 2. We didn't ask too many questions. If they were here, they were welcome. And no one ever walked away hungry. Word got around town. Donations started trickling in. A local bakery dropped off day-old bread every Friday morning. A farmer down the road brought eggs and squash. We added picnic tables to the backyard. Some nights, the whole block felt like a family reunion. I caught Rachel driving by once. She didn't stop. Didn't wave. Just slowed the car, looked out the window, then pressed on the gas and disappeared down the street. And that was fine. I didn't need everyone to understand what I was doing. I didn't need validation from the people who turned their backs on me. What I had now was better than blood. Because blood makes you relatives. But love? Love makes you family. Claire, the college student who painted the living room, had taken to calling the hearth her reset button. Every time I come here, she told me, I remember what people can be. I wrote that down in my notebook. Right next to a quote from Marjorie, you don't need a big house to change a life. Just a warm plate and an open chair. One afternoon, I found Mia placing sticky notes on the walls. Each one had something written on it. You are loved. You are not alone. This room is safe. When I asked what she was doing, she said, in case someone forgets. I had to step outside after that. Pretended I needed air. Truth is, I just didn't want her to see me cry. The knock came on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps, like someone unsure if they were welcome. I was in the garden, kneeling by the rosemary, trimming it back for the fall. When I stood and wiped my hands, I already had a feeling who it was. I opened the front door, and there he was. Ethan. He looked older somehow. Not in the way time ages you, but in the way guilt does. His shoulders were rounded, his shirt untucked. He held nothing in his hands, no excuses, no gifts. Just himself. Hi, Dad, he said. I held the door open and nodded toward the porch. Sit if you want. He did. For a few moments, we just listened to the wind rustle through the trees. The sound of a hammer echoed faintly from the garage. George was fixing one of the benches again. Down the block, kids were riding bikes. Ethan stared at the garden. Looks good. Marjorie's favorites, I said. He nodded. I know. He didn't make small talk. Didn't compliment the house or comment on the number of visitors. He just sat there, twisting his wedding ring around his finger, the way he used to when he was nervous before a big exam. Then, finally, he spoke. I came to say I was wrong. I didn't move. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought I was protecting you from having to make hard decisions, from having to deal with the weight of the house and the future. But I realize now. I was trying to make my life easier. Not yours. I looked at him then, really looked. There was no defiance in his face, no defense. Just truth, laid bare like an open wound. You stopped seeing me as a person, I said quietly. I became an obstacle. A checkbox. I know, he said, his voice breaking a little. And I hate that it took losing you to realize what I had. I waited. He looked at me. Can you forgive me? I exhaled through my nose. Not a sigh, just a long breath, like I'd been holding it for months. I don't know if I can forgive what you did, I said. But I can acknowledge what you're doing now. He nodded slowly. I didn't come to take anything, he said. I saw Noah and Mia coming here. And I thought, maybe I could show up too. Just once. Just, see you. That's up to you, I said. Not me. He looked confused. You want a relationship again? I continued. Then you show up. You show up when it's uncomfortable. When there's nothing to gain. When no one's watching. That's how you rebuild trust. Ethan sat back, stared out at the garden again. "I miss her," he said. "Mom. Every day. But I think I tried to forget her, because remembering her made me feel like I wasn't measuring up." "You didn't need to measure up," I said. "You just needed to remember what mattered." We sat in silence for a few more minutes. A light breeze passed between us, carrying the scent of the rosemary and the lemon balm. I thought about how many years I'd spent wanting this moment, some form of recognition. An apology. A return. And yet, now that it was here, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Ethan stood slowly. "I won't keep you." I stood with him. "You're welcome here. But on my terms now. This house isn't about legacy anymore. It's about service. If you want to be part of that, you come with open hands. Nothing more." He nodded. "I'll think about it." Then he looked me in the eye. "Thank you for still being here." I watched him walk back down the path, past the garden, past the new welcome sign painted by Mia. He paused once, touched the gate, then left. I stood on the porch a little longer, listening to the sounds of Marjorie's hearth returning to life behind me, chairs scraping, laughter from the back room, a timer going off in the kitchen. I didn't know if Ethan would return. And truthfully, I didn't need him to. Because family isn't about who shows up once. It's about who stays. Speech balloon: would you have given your child a second chance? Share your thoughts below. The grand opening wasn't grand in the way most people would imagine. There were no ribbons, no television cameras, no speeches with microphones. Just folding chairs set up on the front lawn, the smell of stew drifting out from the kitchen, and laughter echoing across the street like wind chimes in summer. Someone had painted a wooden sign and staked it beside the porch. "Marjorie's hearth, all are welcome here." It made my chest ache, not with sadness, but with something gentler. Pride. Memory. Peace. We had over 50 people that night. Families, veterans, teens, elderly neighbors, a few single mothers. A pastor from 2 towns over came with a van of volunteers. A young woman donated blankets and board games. George gave a speech, awkward and short, but full of heart. "She always said this house had more to give," he told the crowd, motioning toward me. Well, Henry made sure it did. They clapped. I didn't expect them to. Mia helped serve dessert. Noah handed out lemonade. Claire ran the donation table. Everyone belonged, and no one had to ask how. I stood in the doorway, jacket draped over one arm, watching the house hum with life. Every wall, every floorboard, every creak in the stairs was part of something again. It was no longer a house filled with silence. It was a home filled with purpose. After the crowd began to thin, I walked upstairs, past the room where Ethan once slept, past the small reading nook we'd created near the window. I opened the door to the master bedroom and stepped inside. Everything had been cleaned, dusted, and preserved with care. Marjorie's rocking chair sat by the window. I sat in it. Pulled out one of her letters, the last one. The one I hadn't opened until now. Her handwriting was shakier than usual. "If you're reading this, it means you held on to this place, to our home, longer than I feared you would have to. I always hoped Ethan would cherish it. Maybe he will. Maybe not. But you, Henry, you always understood what made this house sacred. It wasn't the bricks. It wasn't the land. It was the kindness in the kitchen. The forgiveness in the hallway. The quiet laughter before bed. That's what made this place holy. If you can carry that forward, even if just for a while, then I'll still be here, too." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. She was right. She always had been. Later that night, I found myself in the garden. The moon was high, the lavender swayed gently in the breeze. I sat on the edge of the stone bench, knees aching, hands dirty from replanting the basil that had been knocked over. Still think you should have let me get that concrete patio, I said aloud, smiling softly to the stars. But you were right. Dirt's more forgiving. I don't know if she was listening. But I like to think she was. That same evening, Noah and Mia sat on the porch swing while the younger kids played tag in the yard. I saw Ethan walk up the path, slower than usual, a box in his hands. I met him at the gate. I found some of Mom's old books, he said. Thought they might belong here. I took the box without a word. He didn't try to come in. Just gave me a nod and turned to leave. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was something. Inside the box was a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, Marjorie's favorite. Inside the cover, she'd written, "Real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway." I placed it on the new shelf in the reading room. That night, after the last guest had left and the dishes were done, I stood in the kitchen with Claire and George, finishing the last of the lemonade. "You ever think you'd be running a community center at your age?" Claire teased. I chuckled. "I thought I'd be in a rocking chair, yelling at birds." "Well, you're still in the chair," George said. "You just took the birds out and replaced them with people." Claire grinned. "Marjorie would be proud." I nodded slowly. "She always knew the house wasn't finished," I said. "Even when I thought it was." When they left, I turned off the porch lights, checked the locks, and walked through the house one last time before bed. Every room had life in it again. Not the life I thought I'd have in my later years. Something better. Chosen. Earned. Shared. I laid down in the bed Marjorie and I once shared and looked at the ceiling, the shadows from the trees playing across the walls. And I whispered, "It's alive again, love. Just like you wanted."